He was a veterinarian. He was also a soldier in the American Revolution. But along with George Blanchard and Harriet Wilson, we want to tell a story of the enslaved African Americans who escaped and found their way to Milford and were harbored by anti-slavery activists and the network of anti-slavery activists who provided safe houses, of which there are many. This story also includes the Hutchinson family singers who lent their talent to the anti-slavery movement. So this project has been a couple of years in the research and planning stages, and if COVID cooperates, we'll be presenting this in the near future. So stay tuned for coming attractions. Thank you.
So hello everyone. I can hardly see over this. This is absolutely so exciting for us, for me personally. And I'll just tell you a little bit. We have the first edition copy of Harriet Wilson's book, Our Name, or Sketches in the Life of a Free Black, right here in Milford. Probably not since the 1800s, 1859 after it was printed, since we haven't had our original copy here. But when I got a call, I was sitting in my office late one 5 o'clock, almost the end of the day, working on some project, and I got a call and it said, are you guys, I forget how it started, the Black Heritage Show, but I have an original copy of Harriet Wilson's book that I would like you to have. And believe you me, I almost fell off my chair. Barbara from our office was with me, and it was just one of those really exciting moments to think that something we've been looking for so long just came. As I want to say, the stars aligned, and we were able to, through the generous offer, and through actually all the work that Rebecca Davis did. She really wanted Wilson's book to come home, and she found us. And I have to thank John and Shay Robbins for making this possible, making this gift to us possible. Rebecca is here. I want to acknowledge her, so she would stand. And I may add, Rebecca hand-delivered the book from Oakland, California. That's how important this was of a journey for her as well. And I want to acknowledge John and his wife Shay. And the owner of the Harriet Wilson House, who was so generous in allowing us to visit there today. I want to just thank David. There are a lot of people to thank for today's event. Our partnering organization, the church, the First Congregational Church. Everyone's name, I'm not going to go through it, but it's at the back of the program. And the members of the Historical Society who put on a real good lunch for us, and we'll have a reception after. And our staff and volunteers from the trail. And a special thank you for all of you who are joining us live and on our Zoom streaming to bear witness to this moment. I say bear witness because for so long, New Hampshire's Black history has been erased from our memory. And I remember the first day that I heard back in 2002 that we had Black history in our state. And there was a woman in Portsmouth who was doing Black history. She's here today, Valerie Cunningham. So while Valerie was busy making Black history in Portsmouth visible, there was an article in the paper here that said Harriet Wilson was the town's forgotten daughter. And that article led to the formation of the Harriet Wilson Project, where a group of women from the Black Heritage Black Professional Women's Heritage Association came together and decided that it was really important for us to make this history visible and permanent. And we have one of those members here, Harriet Williams. And so it was we've seen Wilson's history erased in 1859 and erased again in 1983 when Gates republished Wilson's work. And so we wanted to make this visible, permanent recording of New Hampshire's Black history. And little known to us, we decided to make a monument in her honor of these women who didn't know what they were getting into. And in 2 years after we did this, we unveiled a monument that's across the street honoring Wilson, and it became the first monument in the state to honor a person of color. Now, Wilson's story is told in her book, Our Negro Sketches in the Life of a Black. It's an autobiographical novel, the first published in 1859 by Harriet Wilson, and it was rediscovered, as I said, by Henry Louis Gates in 1981 and published in 1983. This book became the first novel in the world to be published by a Black woman. And I thought the whole state should know this. I mean, for such an accomplishment, that she would be honored, and her book would be honored. That we've been working to get that story in the schools. It's still not studied in the schools in New Hampshire. And recently, with the new laws that's been passed, we'll have to work to make sure that that gets undone, or else this book will be, again, erased from our history. Today, we're going to read, I have some amazing volunteers who last night volunteered to do the readings today, and we will read excerpts from Wilson's book, which tells a fictionalized version of Wilson's life story through the character of Fredo, who is also, when she moves into the family that she becomes indentured to, her name is changed from Fredo to Arneg. Fredo is, and I'm going to let the readers tell you some of the stories, and our first person up is Carolyn Saunders.
The audience that Wilson addresses in the preface is both the abolitionist audience similar to that addressed in Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl and Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. In a unique move, Wilson addresses my colored brethren. This dual audience is intended to provide economic support for the author, and to understand her textual exposure of slavery's cruel existence in the form of indentured servitude in the supposedly free pre-Civil War war. Preface. In offering to the public the following pages, the writer confesses her inability to minister to the refined and cultivated, the pleasure supplied by abler pens. It is not for such these crude narrations appear. Deserted by kindred, disabled by failing health, I am forced to some experiment which shall aid me in maintaining myself and child without extinguishing this feeble life. I would not from these motives even palliate slavery at the South by disclosures of its appurtenances north. My mistress was wholly imbued with Southern principles. I do not pretend to divulge every transaction in my own life, which the unprejudiced would declare unfavorable in comparison with treatment of legal bondmen. I have purposely omitted what would most provoke shame in our good anti-slavery friends at home. My humble position and frank confession of errors will, I hope, shield me from severe criticism. Indeed, defects are so apparent it requires no skillful hand to expose them. I sincerely appeal to my colored brethren universally for patronage, hoping they will not condemn this attempt of their sister to be erudite, but rally round me a faithful band of supporters and defenders.
Motherhood is a key concern for Wilson in the text. The first chapter operates outside the main plot that tells of Fredo's time at the Belmont household. Instead, it focuses on the story of Fredo's mother, Mag Smith, who is a fallen white woman who marries a black man to free herself from poverty and ill health. Both Fredo's birth mother and her surrogate mother, Mrs. Belmont, are pictured as far from nurturing or maternal. The idea of motherhood is even more intriguing considering it is Wilson's own maternal responsibilities that compel her to write the text so that her young son may eat. "Send her to the country house," said Mary in reply to the query. What should be done with her, in a tone which indicated self-importance in the speaker. "Keep her," said Jack. "She's real handsome and bright, and not very black either." "Where could she sleep?" asked Mary. "I don't want her near me." "In the L chamber," answered the mother. "How will she get there?" said Jack. "She'll be afraid to go through the dark passage, and she can't climb the ladder safely." "She'll have to go there. It's good enough for a nigger," was the reply. While this conversation was passing below, Fredo lay revolving her little mind whether she would remain or not until her mother's return. She was of willful, determined nature, a stranger to fear, and would not hesitate to wander away should she decide to. She remembered the conversation of her mother with Seth, the words "given away," which she heard used in reference to herself, and thought she did not know their full import. She thought she should, by remaining, be in some relation to white people she was never favored with before. So she resolved to tarry with the hope that mother would come and get her sometime.
Continuing from chapter 3. Wilson's initial description of Fredo is interesting for a number of reasons. In her youth, Fredo is described as full of vitality and spirit. Once Fredo is bound to serve Mrs. Belmont, her body becomes increasingly feeble as it is ruined by the ceaseless tyranny of harsh physical labor and abuse. When Fredo turns 9 years old, Mrs. Belmont declares that her schooling is complete and that she must resume housework full-time. One day, the family is busy in preparation for their son's James visit. Mrs. Belmont is extremely anxious about preparing the house for her son's visit and is in an especially foul mood. She tasks Fredo with picking wood. When Fredo brings an insufficient bundle for the hearth, Mrs. Belmont punishes her. This happens for several rounds until Mrs. Belmont's fury is so great that she starts to kick Fredo. Fearful and hurt, Fredo runs away and hides. Thus passed a year, no intelligence of Mag. It was now certain Fredo was to become a permanent member of the family. Her labors were multiplied. She was quite indispensable, although but 7 years old. She had never learned to read, never heard of a school until her residence in the family. Mrs. Belmont was in doubt about the utility of attempting to educate people of color who were inescapable of elevation. 3 months of schooling, summer and winter, she enjoyed for 3 years. Her winter overdress was a cast-off overcoat, once worn by Jack, and a sunbonnet. At home, no matter how powerful the heat when sent to rake hay or guard the grazing herd, she was never permitted to shield her skin from the sun. She was not many shades darker than Mary now. What a calamity it would be to ever to hear the contrast spoken of. Mrs. Belmont was determined the sun should have full power to darken the shade which nature had first bestowed upon her as best befitting.
Perplexities, another death. After the death of Mrs. Belmont's son, James, Mr. Belmont starts to take more notice of Fredo's spiritual education. He encourages Aunt Abby to take Fredo to evening sermons. During these sermons, Fredo's curiosity as a young black girl makes her a novelty. One of the neighbors, observing Fredo's participation, informs Mrs. Belmont of the young girl's nature during these sermons. Mrs. Belmont worries that Fredo may reveal her abuses during the sermons, so she orders the young girl to not attend religious services, or else Mrs. Belmont would whip her to death. Fredo pondered. Her mistress was a professor of religion. Was she going to heaven? Then she did not wish to go. If she should be near James even, she could not be happy with those fiery eyes watching her ascending path. She resolved to give over all thought of future world and strove daily to put her anxiety far from her. It was not long before an opportunity offered of profiting by his advice. She was sent for wood, and not returning as soon as Mrs. B calculated, she followed her, and snatching from the pile a stick, raised it over her. "Stop," shouted Fredo, "strike me, and I'll never work a mite more for you." And throwing down what she had gathered, stood like one who feels the stirring of free and independent thoughts. By this unexpected demonstration, her mistress, in amazement, dropped her weapon, desisting from her purpose of chastisement. Freda walked towards the house, her mistress following with the wood she herself was sent after. She did not know before that she had the power to ward off assaults. Her triumph in seeing her enter the door with her burden repaid her for much of her former suffering.
Hail. When Fredo turns 18 years old, she is no longer legally bound to the Belmonts. She endures many trials in trying to find work outside of the Belmont house and falls sick intermittently over the next few years. She marries a black man named Samuel, whose constant absence and eventual passing does not provide her sickness with any relief. Finally, when she manages to recover from her illness, she seeks an instructor's help to learn the craft of making straw bonnets and begins making money for herself through this enterprise. Along the way, she fulfills her spiritual education. With a renewed sense of herself and a growing community of friends, she gains the confidence to start her own black hair care business. Now Harriet from the book. She had become very expert with her needle the first year of her release from Mrs. B, and she had forgotten none of her skill. Mrs. H praised her, and as she improved in health, was anxious to employ her. She told her she could in this way replace her clothes, and as her board would be paid for, she would thus gain something. Many times her hands wrought when her body was in pain, but the hope that she might yet help herself impelled her on. She learned that in some towns in Massachusetts, girls make straw bonnets, but it was easy and profitable. But how should she, black, feeble, and poor, find anyone to teach her? But God prepares the way when human agencies see no path. Here was found a plain, poor, simple woman who could see merit beyond a dark skin. And when the invalid mulatto told her sorrows, she opened her door and her heart and took the stranger in. Expert with the needle, Fredo soon appalled her instructress, and she sought also to teach her the value of useful books. And while one read aloud to the other of deeds historic and names renowned, Fredo experienced a new impulse. She felt herself capable of elevation. She felt that this book information supplied an undefined dissatisfaction she had long felt, but could not express. Every leisure moment was carefully applied to self-improvement, and a devout and Christian exterior invited confidence from the villagers. Thus, she passed months quiet, growing, and the confidence of her neighbors and newfound friends.
The appendix is composed of these three letters of attestation that provide some of the minimum biographical information about Harriet Wilson. Such letters of reference were often in African American narratives in the 19th century. While support was necessary for African American writers, particularly former slaves, to gain credibility even within the eyes of an abolitionist audience. Feeling a deep interest in the welfare of the writer of this book and hoping that its circulation will be extensive, I wish to say a few words in her behalf. I have been acquainted with her for several years and have always found her worthy the esteem of all friends of humanity, one whose soul is alive to the work to which she puts her hand. Although her complexion is a little darker than my own, I esteem it a privilege to associate with her and assist her whenever an opportunity presents itself. It is with this motive that I write these few lines, knowing this book must be interesting to all who have any knowledge of the writer's character or wish to have. I hope no one will reduce to aid her in her work, as she is worthy the sympathy of all Christians and those who have a spark of humanity in their interest, in their breast. Thinking it unnecessary for me to write a long episode, I will close my bidding with Godspeed. CBS.
So that's just a sampling of the writing with some explanations before the chapters. And the appendix that Claudette just read was written by someone from Milford who attested to the author's, Harriet Wilson's, identity. We don't know who that person was. It's CBS. So there's still much more research left to fill out Harriet Wilson's story. We do know that much of what's in the book, through the research that Henry Louis Gates did and Gabrielle Foreman did in their research, that it was Wilson's story. We know that after she leaves Milford, she goes to a W town. There is some talk as to what that W town could be. One of the scholars, Barbara White, who did a lot of research to find the connection to the Belmonts as being the Haywood family from Milford, she thinks it's Worcester, where there was a thriving Black community, and she thinks that because Wilson writes in her book that she gets this formula for hair dyes. And we know that there was a thriving barbershop, beauty shop owned by Black people in Worcester. And actually we have a descendant in here today from the thriving community, Black community in Worcester, and that's Yvonne Goldsberg with us. And we know that the bottles were made in Manchester, and we have an example of the bottles that you'll see when we go over the reception that the Historical Society owns. And there's quite a bit of more. We know that she sells the hair dyes, she sells her book, and she sells cookies. Those are the three items that we know for sure she was selling door to door. We also know that her son dies pretty much the year after her book is published. And it's really ironic, he dies at 6 years old, the same age that she was when she was abandoned. And the reason she writes the book is to support herself and child. And with the loss of her child, we think that's why the book went into, she did not promote it as much as we would have seen the other slave narratives around. Wilson would then go on to become a famous spiritualist, being at Walden Pond with all the spiritualists of the day. And she would own her own school in Boston. She's listed as a nurse in some places, and we know she's buried in Quincy, in the cemetery in Quincy. I don't know if you have any questions. We have a few minutes for question and answers if anybody has them. Before we close out our program. There is much work that we're doing around recovering these stories and making the history visible and permanent in our state. I think it changes all of us to know these stories. Not only are people of color that live in our state that's creating those roots, that sense of belonging, but all of us in knowing a fuller, more fleshed out, real story that creates the humanness in all of us. And if there are no questions, I'm going to pass this over to Reverend Thompson to make some closing remarks and sing us out.
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to say that I was the founding president of the Black Heritage Trail in New Hampshire. And on behalf of I'm still a board member. On behalf of the board, I want to thank all of you here in Milford, those of you who have come here, those others of you who have supported the projects that have been done, including the erection of the statue. Those from the Historical Society, I really hope to commend you. A lot of this work, well, none of this work would be accomplished if it had not been for the interest of local historians. We would not be doing this if it were not for the work of a local historian, Valerie Cunningham. And I always like to say that what she demonstrates is the power of an individual to make a big difference. Because this one woman began this journey when she was a child, saying, where's the history of the people who look like me? And so that's why we're here today, because she had the courage to ask that question, and then the will to follow it up with action. So thank you, Valerie. Let us all take some encouragement for what Valerie has accomplished and encourage the rest of us to accomplish. So thank you, Valerie. You know, Valerie, every time Valerie and I are in the same place, I go through this, and she may get a little overwhelmed and think that I'm just blowing smoke somewhere, but really, I do it because I think it is such an incredible lesson for all of us to learn. Follow up your questions. Tell our young people, you have these questions, follow them up. Take them seriously and look at what has happened. Now, I grew up in West Virginia, and I always wondered where the Africans were in the early history of our country. Had I had any idea that in New Hampshire there were Africans who were making their way and helping to establish, laying the groundwork in one of the first colonies, then I would have felt a sense of greater ownership as an American, as opposed to a young man trying to prove to myself in the world that I also am a part of this nation. No one should have to prove that. And the work of the trail, the work of the local historical societies, the attentiveness of all of you makes it less likely that a young African-American child born within this country will feel that those who look like him were not a part of this nation's founding. And so I'm grateful to you for that. We all should be grateful to each other that our nation, our wonderful nation, which has as one of its principal goals the notion that though we are different, we can live together as one, a revolutionary notion, one that we're still trying to live up to, I must add. But your part of it is critical. What we're doing in America is critical. We must learn to do it better. The world needs to see that it can be done. And I think the world needs to see this even more now. So I thank you. So I enjoy singing. I feel like it's part of my way of saying thank you to God for giving me the gift of song. A lot of people still like to hear me sing, which is great. I don't think it necessarily always has to be that way. So I'm grateful to that. And I'm always happy to sing spirituals because they tell the story of Africans in this nation and of victory. And lately I've come to recognize the story of the slaves, those enslaved Africans, and the way that they got over, one of which was by using music to speak their pain as well as their hopes, really is part of American heritage. It isn't just the heritage of black people in America, but it's the heritage of white folks in America too. Americans prevailed against enslavement by finding and creating music that was true and foundational in our nation. This music they created, these spirituals, those songs, are now found as a foundation for the music of the world. Almost everywhere music is made these days, there is an obligation paid to Africa, and in large part that's because of what Africans in this country did as they learned how to survive in the midst of slavery. So I want you to know that Jerry Ann, brilliant Jerry Ann, has told me she's tired of hearing me sing spirituals, but quite frankly, I don't really care. And I'm not saying that because she can't reach me. And hopefully she'll be over it by the time she gets through this striking business, or I get through this striking business. When Egypt went, excuse me, wow. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Thus said the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. No more in bondage shall they toil. Let my people go. Let them come out with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. So I just want to also announce that the next events of the Black Heritage Trail will be the Tea Talks. The first one happens on February the 4th. February the 6th is a Sunday afternoon. These are talks that we give through the month of February and the first couple of weeks in March. They'll be Zoomable, and so I encourage you to stay attentive to the offers of the trail, and I appreciate it in advance your support. Thank you.